Hey, it's a new world, gotta adapt to it. Innovation, information, more than the average. Rushing, please ignore the interruptions, cause this is digital discussions.
All right, everybody, welcome to the first inaugural official episode of Digital Discussions. I'm super excited. The topic today is rent relief during COVID-19, what we're all dealing with. I have an amazing panel of guests today. I have Mahlum, the founder of Back on My Feet and SOLIDCORE. I have Marc Falsetto, the co-founder of JEY Hospitality, a restaurant and hospitality group in South Florida. And I have the wonderful Ressa from DLC Management. Chris is the EVP, Chief Operations Officer, and responsible for $2.5 billion of their asset portfolio. So, guys, welcome.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks for having us, Jay.
Yeah, man. Listen, so I'm going to kick us off here. I'm going to ask Chris to describe to us what's going on right now in his world as far as tenants asking for some sort of relief, since a lot of them are closed for business. Chris, what's happening?
Yeah, so we have, we have about 80 shopping centers that we own across the country. I would say first and foremost, it is different everywhere. So no market is the same. I think that's first and foremost. Is there's different markets that are different. There's some tenants who are trying to figure out how to be essential and stay open. There's some tenants being creative. You're seeing things like McAllister's Deli is, selling deli meat as like a grocer would. And there's groups doing things like that. I think, and so you have that spectrum where there's tenants trying to stay open. There's other tenants who just have shut it down and either government mandated or not. And so you have this wide spectrum based on market type of tenant. Fortunately for us, in the properties we own, we do have a lot of essential retailers. So we have a lot of grocery anchored or Walmart anchored or Target anchored or wholesale club anchored. But we do have, other national tenants who are going through this, who are not open. And we have the small business owners who are not open. And there's some tenants who are paying, and there's some tenants who are looking for some relief, whether they're open or not. I think, I would say this, I think I thought I would have more of a discussion about whether they're open or not. And that's not really where the discussion is about is whether they're open or not. It's more about the partnership and is there something to talk about? Okay.
So, Ann, you have 72 studios that are currently closed, and that's outside of your control. So what's going on in the world of SOLIDCORE and trying to keep the business healthy through this time?
Well, I can tell you one thing. My tequila consumption is up because I have to talk to landlords every day, all day, with the multitude of personalities. Yeah, man, it's challenging.
We're losing you.
Can you see me now?
I see and hear you, Ann.
Okay.
Yeah, now we're good.
Okay. So yeah, our position is pretty firm, and frankly, so is the landlord. So we're at a little bit of an impasse. And listen, our stance is we're not generating any revenue right now, right? Like we went from generating revenue, being super healthy, to one day having to close and all of a sudden our cash flow going to zero. So asking us to pay rent and the landlords looking for relief from their tenants, it's just an impossible formula, Jay, right? I have been saying to all of our landlords that this has to flow up. I don't expect the landlords to absorb all of this sort of cost, but my relationship is with them. So I have to push it up to them. They need to push it up to the banks, and the banks obviously need to push it up to the government. If you flow it down, and this is what I think is so imbalancing with the scales. If you flow it down and you say, you know what, no matter what, you guys aren't operating, you still need to float, pay rent. All you're doing is economically suffocating us for a long period of time. And what people mainly are saying is, oh, we're going to defer it. You can pay it in 2021. I have $625,000 in lease payments due every single month. So if all of these landlords want to defer for 3 months, now all of a sudden I have almost $2 million of extra costs, when there's no way for me to recoup any of this revenue that I'm losing on a day-to-day basis. And
Sorry.
Chris, my final point with this is that, you know, I'm not even trying to make the philosophy argument any longer because it doesn't work, or the ethics argument. I'm simply making an economic argument to them that if you give us 3 months abatement, we have a 10-year lease with all of these folks. We've never missed a rent payment. We're a very strong tenant. 3 months of abatement is like 1.5% of our overall financial relationship with these individuals, with these companies, right? You want to evict us, you want to bankrupt us, you want to make things impossible on us, but the landlord doesn't want to assume any like risk to their profits. They want to be paid in full when we will never be paid in full. So all of that is going to happen with the retailer, right? We're going to say, well, our position has been, if you want to evict me, go ahead and evict me, right? You're going to have a vacant space for God knows how long. You're going to have to struggling finding a tenant that you even want in that space. You're going to have to shell out TI again. You're going to have to shell out abatement. And you're going to have someone paying a lot lower rent than what we're paying, hundreds of thousands, if not in the millions of dollars over the course of a 10-year term. Now I'm asking for, let's just say one of my rents is in New York and it's $25,000 a month. It's $75,000 versus the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, you will lose by evicting me. I'm not trying to strong arm the landlord. It's a simple economic argument. You want me to be healthy. You should be working with us and allow us to get back to a position where we go back to paying rent and operating normally. And by deferring rent, you're not doing that.
So Ann,
you can jump in quick, but I just want to say real quickly, and then we'll get to Mark. I just want to say, you know, clearly SOLIDCORE, you know, boutique fitness is one circumstance, and Ann's forced to be closed. There's a lot of other categories, right? And you have healthy companies that have elected not to pay their rent, which is an even bigger issue. And I'm sure once we get into the payroll protection plan and all of the healthy companies that are trying to take advantage of that and keeping it out of, you know, folks like Marc's hands, who he's got a restaurant hospitality business, probably one of the, you know, worst impacted categories here. So anyway, go chime in on what Ann was saying.
So just real quick, Ann, I appreciate what you said. I give you another perspective. So how many stores did you open last year?
28.
And so what was the average TI package?
$200,000.
So the average monthly rent?
Oh, I mean, we have locations in North Dakota and New York City. So it varies from $5,000 a month to $25,000 a month.
So I'll use a round number. Let's say $15,000. One of the things that I tell the tenants is, you know, some of the tenants is like, I had a conversation with a tenant that it was a $10 deal and we spent $60 and we did it 3 years ago. $60 on top of landlord work. And I said, okay, so I understand you've been shut down a full 30 days. You have no revenue come in for full 30 days. I've been in the red for 1,200 days. I haven't made money in 1,200 days on this deal. And so while I can appreciate that you have no rent coming in, but I've been in the red for 1,200 days. And
yeah,
so now, and for that, I now have to either abate rent or do an interest-free loan for a deferral. And it's a big challenge for us because we've sunk in a significant amount of capital bank for you guys in the partnership that we have. And we're now significantly in the red, and we can, or we don't have to get in what the, you know, certain leases say on the obligation. But I one of the things that we're saying is, listen, we're willing to have a discussion in certain scenarios, but you can't limit this to a black swan event. It's in a box because it totally discounts everything and the economic challenges that might have been previous, like a significant amount of TI, because I can tell you that we wouldn't have made those deals if we didn't think we would get the rent, right? When the local nail salon is not getting that same level of TI, right? When they're right, you do that because it's a credit risk. The risk is you can't spend that much money on someone who doesn't have money in the bank and doesn't have that credit. So to your point, I hear you loud and clear, and I think that, you know, there should be partnerships. It's challenging for all, but I would tell you that, you know, in that one scenario, I've been in the red for 1,200 months. Now the world's hit the fan, and for 30 days or maybe 90, you're going to be losing a lot of profits, and now I have to take another hit.
But
Yeah,
so,
well,
but Chris,
real quick, I want to definitely give Marc some time to chime in here so we can hear about the restaurant hospitality sector. And ultimately, you know, it's not necessarily a hit on profits. It's, you know, keeping a company open for business, essentially.
Totally.
You know, when you have no income. Marc, talk to us. What's up with your restaurants? Are they open for business? Are you doing takeout? What are you doing?
Well, first off, thanks, Jay. Thanks for having me. Hey, guys. Marc Falsetto down here in Miami, Fort Lauderdale area. Listen, we're taking on the chin. We got all 7 of our locations, 6 restaurants, 2 bars. The bars are completely closed for service. The restaurants, we're doing takeout and pickup, delivery, curbside, however you want to talk about it. So we are technically open, but we're down 90 to 98% in sales daily. So, you know, we're down $50,000 a day in revenue.
Even on the locations that are open for takeout, you're still operating at a loss.
Oh yeah, I've let go of 250 hourly employees, line cooks, bartenders, hostesses. I've kept the corporate office, the core 6 of us, obviously controllers, accountants, type people. We've kept just the chef, the general manager, and a floor manager at every location. So just 3 people working all 13 hours a day, 7 days a week at each location. And that's how we're, we've give everybody a 50% pay reduction. And the takeout sales are able to keep the salaries afloat for the key guys. And hopefully we'll get open soon.
Have you guys paid your rent in April?
No, I have not paid the rent in April, but I'm definitely not going to pay the rent in April. We jumped the gun and sent letters out the first week of March explaining to get the communication open with our landlords. So we have all different landlords. We have single, I guess, how you want to call them, the real estate side, single tenant landlords, just one property guys. I got some stuff in strip centers and other stuff that city municipal garages my landlord. So we're dealing with a bunch of different aspects. But like Ann said, treating everyone differently. We have a different approach for each individual location. But the general consensus is April is, all 5 of the 6 landlords says April, we're going to talk about it. And we're not going to talk about it now. We're going to talk about it later. So we're going to defer it. But we have not come to any terms on April. But moving forward for May and June, we're going to look at it a month-by-month basis with each landlord and find out what happens with the PPE. So I do have some information, and we've been funded for one of the loans. Yeah, thank you. Well, one that I'm indirectly involved with, but Jay knows one of our family restaurants in our group got funded 2 days ago, which was 2.5 times. But the problem that the stimulus package I guess the problems that arise is they're not restaurateurs. So for our space is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. Even though we're open, it'd be physically, we wouldn't be able to use 75% of the funds on our employees because those employees have no job. There's nowhere to bring them back to. And as the June 30th date approaches, I guess if you're familiar, you have to use 100% of the proceeds by June 30th. 75% being on payroll, 25% for other expenses. So for now, we've just looked at the 25% and say, let's use $200,000 per location as an example. If we receive $200,000 per location, I'm earmarking 25% of that. So $50,000 I would earmark to other expenses and for rent. So we've talked to our landlords and say, listen, if we get this stimulus package, we'll talk about either doing the full rent or maybe we'll do CAM only. So I feel the landlords as well that you guys may be hurting on some of your expenses. So we'll do proposing maybe CAM only for the next 60 days, and then look at a month to month after that. That's kind of where we are right now.
Thanks, Mark. Chris, the biggest question is, there are so many companies that are unhealthy leading into this, and this came out of thin air. Obviously, nobody could anticipate what
Totally.
happened. So, here's the reality, and no, I don't think anybody here is saying, Chris, it's your responsibility to give us free rent from now through the end of the year so we can, make it out of the woods, so to speak. But that's the biggest problem, I think, that all of us that are in this community are faced with is, if landlords are not given the flexibility, again, everybody has a different situation depending on what type of landlord you are. Not many are as big as DLC, right? So you're in a different position. But the reality is there are, I think it's 110,000 restaurants that will not be reopening as of like next week if they don't get their relief money. And that's just going to continue. There are going to be plenty that open and can't make it because they're forced to pay their rent or whatever it is. So we're all in this together.
Totally agree.
The more rent that, Ann has to pay with SOLIDCORE, the tougher it's going to be for her to make it out of the woods and everybody else.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that point at all. I think I don't disagree with that at all. I think I've used the word partnership, and I think, I do think that the small and medium-sized business is probably a little different. At the end of the day, one of the things that is problematic is, I don't know what anyone's view is what this is going to do to values of commercial real estate. But at the end of the day, there are some investment grade tenants, who are public Fortune 500 companies that didn't pay the rent, right? And so the only reason, and some of those tenants, and most of them, I would say most of those guys paid, even if they're not open, most of them paid, but there are some who didn't. And one of the things is, some of this we've learned it's a cash management thing where you default them and then they're going to cure. So you gave them a 3-week interest-free loan, and that was helpful to them. And so we've seen that starting to happen. The other piece of it is, though, right, let's use, I don't want to say this tenant's name, but there's a tenant out there that's like an average $10, $12 payer that every major national landlord has. And it costs like $120 to do the deal. It's a break-even deal. The only reason you do that deal, their investment grade, is when the world goes nuclear, you expect the rent. Otherwise, you wouldn't do that deal. That is putting pressure on landlords with the small businesses. It's putting significant pressure. If there's tenants like that, that is putting severe pressure on landlords, because like you guys, it's not just the debt. We have the same human capital overhead challenges like everyone else. Everyone's like, for some reason, I feel like everyone only thinks the only expense a landlord has is the mortgage. Simon, who I'm sure is a landlord, you saw they furloughed a bunch of people as well. They let go. They've closed all their malls. It's not just the mortgage, the landlord either. I keep hearing it has to flow. If you have it's not just the mortgage. And so, but my point is those tenants are putting pressure on landlords in the ability to work with everyone else. I think in general, there's a huge consensus out there that, you've seen Connor Flynn of Kimco go, public about national tenants pay your rent so we can help the small business owners, right? You've seen a bunch of, there's been other groups.
I have an email from Kimco that is demanding that I pay my rent. So they're not really helping too much.
So I don't know if they're considering you a small business owner or not, but I think that's the rub, right? That's probably the rub. You have 72 locations. And so you might not be what they're considering a small business owner. I think that you have I think in general on the small business side, I saw Jeff Blau, from Related made a whole public speech about, paying the rent. I think in general,
he made a public speech about paying the rent, and Equinox hasn't paid their rent.
I saw, but yeah. I think that they are, and I think, Connor put that out, that's putting pressure on landlords, especially all the dollars that got invested into some of those larger deals to work with the small business owners. But in general, the reality is, I think most people are working with the small business owners. I think a lot of landlords probably have you in a category that you don't agree with, that you're not a small business. I think that's probably one of the challenges you're facing.
Yeah, and that could be, but we're obviously explaining all of that, and it doesn't seem to matter. We're getting deferment, Chris, and everybody's happy to offer that. But I just want to go back to comment on a thing that you said earlier, which is you losing money. I just want to be mindful that that was a business choice that you made, right? I am not choosing to be closed right now. So this is out of my control to not be generating any revenue. We are mandated, to be closed. And frankly, I know you guys have costs as well. SOLIDCORE laid off 98% of our people 2 days after we closed. We made that difficult but fiscally responsible decision so that when we are allowed to reopen, we can do so on the day that the government says you can reopen. We're not shit. We spent all of our money. Our cash flow balance went so low, we can't afford to reopen. We have all these outstanding bills. Like, we made those responsible decisions. And I frankly had a landlord, tell us that they're choosing to keep X number of employees, therefore we need to pay rent. And I said, let me tell you something. How about if I go to my clients, my consumers who come to SOLIDCORE, and tell them that I'm going to charge their credit card, even though they can't come in and use the space, for the membership fees and for the classes that they're not able to take, because I've got to pay my people. You may have seen that there was a class action lawsuit filed against New York sports clubs who's been trying to do that. You cannot charge people for a service they're not able to use. And I disagree, Chris. You may have that one instance with the 1,200 days that you've lost money, but the landlords are expecting to be paid in full. And that is not partnership that you're speaking of. They agree to get paid later. Everybody's saying, you know what, the 3 months, you can push it into 20 and 21 and amortize it over the course of the year. And I'm saying, but you still want to be paid in full. I have no chance to recoup this revenue. You want to put all these expenses on me still, and you want me to absorb all of it.
I agree with Ann on that.
So I would tell you, we are working with partnering tenants with tenants as well in certain scenarios where, we are willing to work with tenants. I would tell you, I do believe that the deferment is working with tenants, and the majority are appreciative of that. The thing I would say, the business choice that you're talking about, and I haven't read your leases, but the same business choice you made, which is to sign the lease that I probably believe that says you're supposed to pay during this period. So I can appreciate that. I made a business choice to invest the money.
Sure.
But you made the same choice that said, if you were, in this scenario, not thinking of it, same with me, not thinking that this would happen, that you would pay the rent when this happened. So
but Chris, no one can factor in, no one builds a business. Look at Marriott, right? Guy from Marriott, bigwig over there, Dave Gerson, sits on our board. They obviously, if he's closed, he manages overseas at more than 1,000 hotels. They're all closed, right? This is a grade A company that this thing took out, that anybody would have been happy to do a deal with Marriott. So like, some of the lease stuff is a little bit being, thrown out the window. And I want to just repeat, I don't expect you to absorb all the costs, but I don't just say, you know what, it's got to flow up to you and should stop at you. But I'm telling you, if you put it on the tenants of folks like us, we can't put it anywhere. We can't flow it down to our customers and ask them to pay bills when we're closed. We are seeking relief from the government. There's more stimulus coming. Everybody on the way up, including the banks, has to participate. It's the only way that companies, frankly, like us retail tenants, will survive. And if landlords, again, continue to force down, I have already told landlords, we're already getting, emails from people who want to talk to us about opening up in their space. We're going to have a multitude of options of people throwing money at us to get us into spaces after this. And I don't want to use that leverage either, but I'm trying to make a simple economic argument. And I need to say too, Chris, the thing that we've offered is to say, go to your mortgage, go talk to your banks. We are willing to extend our lease term to 10 years and 3 months, 6 months, whatever, to show that you continue to have the money on the ledger. But there's no way that we can pay this right now. And everybody, says to us, oh, apply for the PPP. I'm like, yeah, guys, we're doing that, but you should be applying for that as well, and the stimulus to offer your support. But to, you know, Marc's point too, 75% of that has to go to paying your people, which is what it's for.
That's not optional. 75%.
Yeah, but what's left in SOLIDCORE after we applied, and you know, we should be getting ours too. We just got an email from it on this phone call. We have enough money left to pay for rent. And this is not built for folks like me and Marc. They are talking about office rent, right? One location. It's not built for Marc and I that have several locations. If I use what's left over to pay rent, we don't even make a half month's payment for our 72 locations. We don't even get close. It's not built.
I agree with everything Ann's saying as well, but I told my landlords they got to talk to their lenders, but as we all know, it's not just the lenders. You guys have some private equity groups involved, and the bigger guys don't want to reach in their pockets. And I told them straight up last week, call all your guys that you got, and you know, one being a large private equity, and you guys gonna have to reach into the well and put some more money.
And Marc, I think what you're saying, what I'm saying, everybody has to participate.
I told a landlord last week, and I agree. I told a landlord last week, this is good, the deferment, 3 months, whatever, which is going to make it more difficult on the back end. But Jay, nobody's talking about is when we do reopen in our space. A true partnership, Chris, is when the government says I can only have 30% capacity, or Ann can only have 20 or 10% capacity in the gym. I told them if I'm 50% capacity, we're only paying 50% of our rent.
Yeah, I mean.
And that's just the reality of things. So I don't know how that works flowing up to your lender or your investors. But when the business cannot, mandated by the government, that cannot operate optimal of 30%, how can I pay $80 triple net per square foot when I'm operating the business at 30%? So
listen, I think that's a very good point. And again, I think, listen, you know, Chris is in the same boat as a landlord, because when he structured the deals with folks like you guys, you know, nobody thought that you guys would have to open and operate at 50% capacity or whatever it is. You know, that's still an unknown. So I think, again, what's crazy to me, to kind of take this discussion a little bit more macro, what's crazy to me is, you know, my company Sabre has been focusing on industry segments and categories that are more internet proof or quote unquote recession proof, right? Like fitness and restaurants, right? That have been like the savior of the retail world in some ways, right, Chris?
Totally.
And now we have, you know, 2 multi-unit operators that are saying, you know, listen, if we're forced to pay our rent, who knows what the future has in store for our companies. You know, it's just amazing to me how many businesses are going to unfortunately not make it out of this. And that's going to be the bigger question for me. Like, what happens to all that space, Chris?
Well, but nothing. Oh, sorry, Chris, you go ahead. I'll chime in after.
So I think one of the things to that I can appreciate that it's a challenge for you, but a lot of the landlords, Ann, so are getting things in it's not a I use the word, it's not just this black swan event. I've had tenants in some locations not pay the rent and then request TI in other locations and say, when are you going to pay my TI in this location? And I'm going, wait a second here. And the leases are separate. You're not going to pay me rent over here, but I got to pay you TI over here. How does that work? Right. And so they're not related. Same tenant, not related. And so I think what the piece that I would communicate to you is I bet that if you and I were working, that we could probably, based on what I'm hearing, I would tell you that we could probably come to a resolution. I think one of the things that, you know, is helpful is when, and to give you some context, is there's a lot of non-monetary things in leases. And I don't know how much for you, but that landlords would help them solve the vacancy that's coming that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And there's a trade for non-monetary things. But we have tenants who are like, you know, not willing to open up the lease and go through it and remove things and change things for the monetary change. And so what I keep hearing though is you're saying that the landlord shouldn't take it all. It should be shared pain, I guess is the word I'll use. And I would think a lot of landlords in general, there's certain scenarios where they would believe in shared pain, but I would tell you that, you know, in, you know, getting free rent now, 3 months free, paying, I think, you know, paying no CAM or taxes, that especially in a restaurant scenario, I think if you paid the CAM and taxes, that's smart, because I have to still have the guy there and pay for the insurance to make sure when that that customer comes up to your door, if he slips and falls, that I can cover that, right? To go and do that for you, Mark. And so I think, right, I think you made a smart move by paying the CAM, because I think that, you know, different for Ann, who's not open at all. But for you, I think, you know, the landlord does have real expenses to keep operating the center. And what I would tell you is we try to look at cash preservation at the property level, because we're going to be spending all this CAM dollars that I have contracts with and potentially not getting reimbursed. And it's more costly to operate a partially open center than it is a full or shut down, because now I have to focus on access, security, prevent looting. There's challenges to service you to be able to do the takeout at 98% down in sales. It's challenging for me to operate that center. It's not simple to do, especially if you're in a multi-tenanted center where there's like half the guys are open, half the guys are not. To solve that is real cost.
Yeah.
But I don't know, Ann, if you have things in your leases like co-tenancy or sales kicks or things like that. But you know, I would tell you that one of the things that's falling on deaf ears is for landlords is give me 3 months deferment or free now, and I'll tack on 3 at the end of the term. I think that's falling on deaf ears because landlords going, so wait a second, if I had a healthy location and I had a good store, what you're doing is instead of exercising an option or renewing at the then market rent, all you're doing is extending the term at the current end of term rent. So I'm giving you an interest-free loan now for 5-10 years, all for the benefit of not getting to my option rent. You know, how is that shared pain? That's not that's an economic cash grab from the tenant.
Guys, we have about 3 minutes, but Ann, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be quick. But Chris, the other piece again is the participation. The deferment, there, I have not heard anybody come up with a participation. It is all, we'll defer, we want to be paid in full, you can pay it later. That's not partnership and that's not okay. And I have been like unequivocal in my stance with that. To comment on your TI thing, we had a landlord do the same thing that you're talking about. They owe us $100 grand in TI. They're late over a month. And he's like, I don't have the money, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I tell you what I can do. I'm going to take the TI we owe you and I'm going to count it toward the rent right now. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're not going to take the TI you owe me and pay yourself the rent when we're closed during this time. I'm like, we're not paying rent. So it goes both sides there. And yes, we are looking at the non-monetary things. We do have some exclusive rights for fitness that we are, considering foregoing for abatement at this time. It's just few and far between for those, creative. We are a 2,000 square foot tenant. We're not an anchor in anybody's location. So we don't have a lot of bigger rights that some of the other folks do. All I think Mark and I agree on or saying is it can't be all or nothing. We know that on some level, but there is, of the 70 landlords that I'm talking to, there has not been anyone that said, you know what, we're going to share. Not anyone. There has been very few people that have said, we're going to share in this with you. And we're going to do either half rent or whatever. And then we're going to put this in year 9 or 10 or something back. But to our point, we need you guys working with your lenders. We need you guys working with the government to apply for the same stimulus packages that we are.
So
Excellent. Mark, give us 30 seconds. We have literally
30 seconds right now. No matter what business you're in, your landlord is always your partner. I consider every landlord as one of my business partners, as my silent partner. And any good partnership, you keep the communication open and you work together and you discuss it and you come up with a strategy that will work for everybody and be transparent. And my 2 cents is if you communicate, you're transparent, things will work out. And they always do. And this is just a speed bump. And I'd like to circle back in 30 days after the PPE with Ann. And Chris, we have this conversation like 30 days and see where everybody's at.
Excellent. Chris, 20 seconds.
Listen, this is really challenging for everyone. I think, Ann, you need to do what's in the best interest of your company first and foremost. I think the company's first and foremost, and you got to do what you need to do. And I would continue to try to find creative solutions and think about what those could be, because I think they're out there. I think one of the last thing is I think a lot of tenants out there and landlords think that the deferment is a solution, and there's a lot of that happening. And so that's one of the roadblocks that I think you're hitting when you're talking about that. You don't think that's partnership. I think there's a consensus out there from a significant amount of tenants and landlords that it is. So I would say I do think you're in a little bit of a unique position thinking that that's not partnership. And
all right, we're probably gonna get cut off here. Sorry to cut you guys off, but I appreciate your time. This was a great discussion, and thank you.
Cause this is digital discussions.